A kid's scream pierced the air. Please, stop. Sharp and desperate, thick with fear and shame as his handmade Captain America shield thudded to the pavement, shoved aside by a sneering bully who loomed over him, mocking, "What's wrong, little hero?" Too scared to stand up. Chris Evans halted mid-step outside Hall H, the Comic-Con crowd fading into a blur as his chest tightened with a rush of anger and sorrow, the boy's teary eyes and quivering hands sparking something fierce inside him, a protective urge that drowned out everything else. The bully, all sharp angles and cocky grin, towered over the kid, maybe 11, his voice dripping with scorn as he taunted, "This your big debut? Showing off your junky costume? Lame." The kid lunged for his shield, his small fingers trembling, his stitched-together suit drooping as he stammered, "I just wanted to be like him," and Chris felt the words twist in his gut, his legs propelling him forward before his mind could weigh it. Pushing through the humming throng toward the unfolding scene. "You think you're tough, huh?" Chris's voice sliced through the jeers, deep and firm, edged with a fury that made the bully spin around, his smirk faltering as he clocked who was charging toward him, not some random passerby, but Chris Evans, his cap low but his eyes blazing. Every inch of him radiating a wrath that hushed the snickers of the guy's friends filming nearby. "What's your issue, man?" The bully fired back, puffing up despite the tremor in his tone, his posture wavering as Chris closed in, planting himself between the kid and the tormentor, his stance a wall of unshakable determination. The boy gripped his battered shield tighter, his breath ragged, and Chris could feel the weight of his hope, his pain, pressing against his ribs as he growled, "My issue's you picking on someone half your size just to feel important. You don't even know him." The bully snapped, pointing at the kid, but his confidence was unraveling, his friends' phones dipping as the crowd thickened, murmurs rippling through like a current. Chris stepped closer, nose to nose now, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper as he said, "I don't need to know him to see he's got more heart than you'll ever grasp, making that costume, wearing it proud, while you're out here tearing him down like it proves something." The kid's wide eyes flicked up to Chris, a blend of awe and relief shimmering through his tears, and the bully flinched, his sneer buckling under the relentless heat of Chris's glare. "Back off," Chris warned, his words a vow, not a request, "or I'll make sure everyone here sees you for the coward you are, and I don't mess around." The air thrummed with tension, the kid's shaky breathing loud in the sudden quiet, and Chris stood tall, his heart pounding with a righteous anger that demanded action, right here, right now. The bully's face contorted, defiance warring with the sinking realization that he'd stumbled into a mess he couldn't swagger out of, his eyes flicking from Chris's steady, unblinking stare to the swelling crowd of onlookers whispering and pointing. Their phones now aimed at him like a spotlight he couldn't dodge. He shuffled back a step, his sneakers scraping the pavement, and snapped, "You think you're some hotshot, huh? Storming in here like you run the place." Chris stood his ground, his voice calm but razor-edged as he replied, "I don't need to run anything to see you're out of line. Step away from the kid, now." The words landed heavy, and the bully's friends shifted, one of them mumbling, "Dude, let's just go," but the guy ignored it, his pride digging in as he sneered, "What's this kid to you anyway? Your little fanboy sidekick?" The jab stung, but not Chris. It hit the boy, who flinched, his small hands gripping his shield tighter as he stared at the ground, his shoulders hunching like he wanted to vanish into the concrete. Chris felt the kid's reaction, the way his fragile confidence wavered under that cruel twist of words, and it stoked a fresh surge of anger in him, though he kept it reined and beneath a composure that rattled the bully more than any shout could. "He's not a sidekick," Chris said, his tone low and deliberate, each syllable crisp as he leaned closer. "He's someone who showed up today with more courage than you'll ever scrape together, and I'm not letting you stomp that out." The crowd hummed louder, a woman in a Wonder Woman costume letting out a soft gasp, her hand pressed to her chest as she murmured to her friend, "Is that really Chris Evans?" The bully's gaze darted, registering the growing attention, and his confidence wobbled, his voice pitching higher as he retorted, "You're blowing this way out of proportion, man. This kid's fine. We were just joking around." But the excuse rang hollow, and Chris saw through it, his eyes narrowing as he shot back. Joking around doesn't leave someone shaking like that. Look at him. The kid's head snapped up at that, his dark eyes meeting Chris's for a brief, unguarded moment, and there was a raw openness there, a flicker of gratitude tangled with embarrassment that tugged at Chris's chest in a way he hadn't expected. He hadn't meant to dive this deep, hadn't anticipated the kid's quiet resilience would strike such a chord, but now he was committed, fully, and he couldn't shake the memory of his own childhood, standing up to a taunt and walking away stronger for it. The bully huffed, scrambling to regain traction, and jabbed a finger toward the kid as he said, He's just some geek in a homemade costume. What's your deal? Huh? You gonna play his bodyguard now? The sarcasm landed flat. The crowd bristling as a guy in a Deadpool outfit called out, "Leave the kid alone already." The bully spun, caught off guard, and Chris pressed the advantage, stepping forward until the guy had no choice but to back up, his shoulder brushing the concrete pillar behind him. "You don't get to define him," Chris said, his voice lifting just enough to reach the onlookers, not for show but for truth. And he could sense the kid listening, absorbing it as he went on. "He made that shield. Put on that suit. Came here today because it matters to him, and you don't get to trash that just because you feel like it." The bully's mouth twitched, his comeback faltering as the crowd's murmurs swelled into a chorus of support, a teenage girl in a Black Panther jacket yelling, "Yeah, back off." The tide was turning, the balance shifting, and Chris saw the unease flash in the bully's eyes as he realized he was losing control of the moment fast. "This is ridiculous," the guy grumbled, glancing at his friends for support, but they were already edging away, one of them shoving his phone into his pocket with a nervous shrug as he said, "Come on, man, let's drop it." Chris didn't relent, his focus unwavering as he pressed, "You're finished here, walk away, or I'll make sure security knows exactly what you've been doing, and I'm betting you don't want that kind of headache." The warning hit its mark, the bully's jaw tightening as he sized up his options, his defiance fading into a sour scowl, and for a heartbeat, it looked like he might dig in, until a deep voice rumbled from behind Chris, "Everything okay here?" It was Marcus, his bodyguard, stepping up with arms crossed, his towering frame casting a shadow that made the bully's friends freeze in their tracks. The guy's nerve broke, his hands jamming into his pockets as he muttered, "Forget it, I'm done," and turned, pushing past his buddies to stalk off, the crowd parting with a mix of jeers and scattered cheers that trailed after him like an echo. Chris let out a slow breath, the tightness in his shoulders loosening as he turned to the kid, who stood there clutching his shield, his face a jumble of relief and uncertainty, and he crouched down, meeting his gaze as he said gently, "You holding up, bud?" The boy nodded, quick and uneven, his voice a shaky whisper as he said, "Yeah, thanks. I didn't think anyone would," he faltered, and Chris felt a pang, not of sympathy but of connection, recognizing that shock of being noticed when you're sure you're invisible. "You don't need to thank me," Chris said, his tone warm but solid. "You were standing your ground. He just didn't like that you were tougher than him." The kid blinked, taking that in, and a small, tentative smile broke through, shaky but genuine, as the crowd around them erupted into chatter, voices overlapping with awe and excitement, a few calling out, "That was unreal." And Chris Evans just shut that guy down. The crowd's energy surged around them, a restless hum of voices weaving through the warm Comic-Con air as Chris stayed crouched in front of the kid, his focus unwavering despite the onlookers pressing closer, their murmurs swelling with curiosity and disbelief at what they just witnessed. The boy's hands still trembled around his shield, but his eyes held steady on Chris now, searching his face like he was trying to piece together why someone like him, someone he'd only ever seen on a screen, would step into his world like this. And Chris felt the weight of that gaze, heavier than the cheers or the phones aimed their way. He kept his voice low, steady, as he asked, "What's your name, bud?" The kid blinked, caught off guard, and his answer came out soft, almost lost in the noise, "Ethan." Chris nodded, letting the name settle, and said, "Ethan, you made this shield yourself, right?" The boy's nod was slow, hesitant, his fingers brushing the uneven paint as he mumbled, "Yeah, took me a week. My mom helped with the straps." There was pride there, flickering beneath the embarrassment, and Chris latched onto it, replying, "That's real work, takes patience, guts too, showing it off here." Ethan's lips twitched, not quite a smile but close, and Chris could see the tension in his shoulders start to loosen, though the kid's eyes darted past him, scanning the crowd where the bully had vanished, as if expecting him to slink back any second. Chris followed his glance, then leaned in closer, his tone firm but warm as he said, "He's gone. Ethan, guys like that don't stick around when people stand up to them." Ethan swallowed, his voice barely above a whisper as he asked, "But what if he comes back later?" The question hung there, raw and honest, and Chris felt a jolt, not anger this time, but a quiet ache for the kid's fear, the kind that lingered long after the moment passed. He straightened slightly, resting a hand on Ethan's shoulder, and said, "Then you keep being you. That's enough, more than enough, and if he's dumb enough to try again, he'll have to deal with a lot more than just me next time." Ethan's eyes widened, a spark of something new igniting there, and Chris realized he'd just promised something bigger than he'd intended, but it felt right, unshakably so. The crowd wasn't letting up, their chatter growing louder, more insistent, and a woman's voice cut through, sharp and excited. "Chris, can you sign my poster?" Another chimed in. "That was amazing. Can I get a picture?" Chris glanced over his shoulder, catching Marcus's eye, and the bodyguard gave a subtle nod, already moving to keep the fans at bay, but the shift in focus seemed to shrink Ethan again, his small frame hunching as if the attention might swallow him whole. Chris noticed, his instincts kicking in, and he stood, turning to the crowd with a quick raise of his hands as he called out, "Hey, give us a minute, all right? I'll be over soon, promise." The fans hesitated, some groaning, others nodding reluctantly, and Chris turned back to Ethan, crouching again as he said, "Don't let them spook you. They're just excited. But you're the one I'm here with right now." Ethan blinked up at him, surprise flashing across his face, and muttered, "Me? Why?" Chris grinned, a real one that crinkled his eyes, and said, "Because you've got something worth seeing. Don't let anyone tell you different." Before Ethan could respond, a new voice broke in, tentative but firm. "Excuse me, is he okay?" Chris turned to see a woman pushing through the crowd, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, her face etched with worry as she clutched a water bottle and a worn convention badge that read, "Volunteer." She stopped short, her eyes flicking from Ethan to Chris, and recognition hit her hard. She froze, mouth parting slightly as she stammered, Oh, wow, you're—" Chris waved it off, standing to meet her as he said, "He's all right. Just had a rough moment, Ethan, right?" He glanced at the kid for confirmation, and Ethan nodded, his voice stronger now as he said, "Yeah, this is my mom." The woman, Ethan's mom, knelt beside him, her hands hovering like she wasn't sure whether to hug him or check for bruises, and she said, "I was at the info booth. Someone told me there was trouble, but I didn't know." She trailed off, looking at Chris with a mix of gratitude and disbelief as she added, "Thank you. I can't believe you stepped in like that." Chris shrugged, his hands sliding into his pockets as he replied, "Didn't have a choice. Ethan's too good a kid to let that jerk ruin his day." Ethan's mom smiled, faint but real, and ruffled her son's hair as she said, "He's been working on that costume nonstop. Wouldn't even let me fix the stitches." Ethan ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased, and Chris chuckled, saying, "Those stitches are perfect. Shows it's yours, not some store-bought thing." The crowd was still buzzing, their voices overlapping with speculation. "Did you see how he shut that guy down? And that kid's lucky." But Chris kept his focus on Ethan and his mom, sensing the shift in the air as the moment stretched, fragile but charged with something unspoken. Then Ethan piped up, his voice cutting through the noise as he asked, "Do you think I could be a hero, like, for real?" The question landed like a stone in still water, rippling through Chris's thoughts, and he saw Ethan's mom tense, her eyes locking on him, waiting for his answer as much as Ethan was. Chris didn't hesitate, crouching again to meet Ethan's gaze head-on as he said, "You already are. Heroes don't wait for permission. They just do what's right. Like you did standing up to that guy before I got here." Ethan's jaw dropped slightly, processing that, and his mom's hand stilled on his shoulder, her expression softening as she murmured, "He's always been stubborn like that." Chris nodded, a quiet respect settling in him for this kid and his mom, who'd clearly fought their own battles to get here, and he said, "Stubborn's a good thing, keeps you going when stuff gets tough." The crowd's noise flared again, more fans pushing closer, and Marcus stepped in, his deep voice rumbling, "All right, folks, give them space." But Chris caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye, someone familiar, ducking through the throng. And his stomach tightened as he realized this wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The crowd's clamor pulsed around them, a restless tide of voices and jostling bodies that pressed against Marcus's outstretched arms as he held the fans at bay. But Chris's attention snapped to that flicker of movement, a figure weaving through the throng, purposeful and quick. And his pulse kicked up a notch when he recognized the spiked hair and hunched shoulders of the bully from earlier, now flanked by a taller guy in a faded convention staff shirt. Ethan's mom noticed too, her hand tightening on her son's shoulder as she whispered, "That's him. Why's he back?" Ethan's eyes widened, his shield lifting slightly like a reflex, and Chris straightened, his jaw clenching as he muttered under his breath, "Stay here," before stepping forward, his stride deliberate, cutting through the crowd's noise with a focus that silenced the fans nearest him. The bully stopped short when he saw Chris approaching, his bravado replaced by a nervous twitch in his stance, and the staff guy beside him, older, with a scruffy beard and a headset dangling around his neck, raised a hand, saying, "Hold up, we need to talk." Chris didn't slow down, planting himself a few feet away as he leveled a hard stare at the bully and said, "You've got some nerve showing your face again. What's this about?" The staff guy stepped in, His voice clipped but calm as he replied, "Name's Derek. I run security here, and this kid says you threatened him." Got the crowd riled up against him. The accusation hung there, sharp and unexpected, and Chris felt a surge of disbelief, his hands flexing at his sides as he shot back. Threatened him? He was harassing a kid half his size, filming it like some trophy. I told him to back off. That's it. The bully shifted, his eyes darting to Derek as he muttered. He made it sound like he'd get me kicked out. Turned everyone against me. Man, I was just messing around. Chris's laugh was short, bitter, and he said, "Messing around doesn't involve kicking a kid's shield and laughing while he's scared. You don't get a pass for that." Derek's frown deepened, his gaze flicking between them, and he rubbed a hand over his beard as he said, "Look, I've got witnesses saying it got heated. People are posting videos already. And my boss is breathing down my neck to sort this out before it blows up online." Chris felt the weight of that, the sudden twist of the situation sinking in, not just a confrontation anymore, but something spiraling beyond his control, and he glanced back at Ethan, who was watching with wide, uncertain eyes. His mom pulling him closer like she could shield him from this new tension. "Those videos will show what happened," Chris said, turning to Derek, his voice steady despite the frustration coiling in his chest. "He was the one starting trouble. I stepped in because no one else did." Derek nodded, slow and grudging, and said, "Maybe, but this guy's claiming he's the victim now. Says you humiliated him in front of everyone." The bully smirked faintly, sensing an angle, and Chris's temper flared, though he kept it locked down as he replied, "He humiliated himself the second he went after Ethan. Don't twist this." The crowd was buzzing louder now, fans craning to hear, and a teenage girl near the front called out, "That jerk deserved it. Leave Chris alone." Derek shot her a look, then turned back, his tone shifting as he said, "All right, here's the deal. I've got to take statements, keep this contained, but I need you all to come with me, away from this circus." Chris's stomach dropped, not for himself but for Ethan, who didn't need this dragged out, and he said, "Fine, but the kid and his mom don't need to be part of some security grilling. They've been through enough." Ethan's mom spoke up, her voice firm despite the strain as she said, "If it's about my son, I'm not leaving. He's not the one in the wrong here." Derek sighed, clearly out of his depth, and said, "Fair enough. Just follow me. We'll sort it in the staff office. 5 minutes tops." Chris nodded, reluctant but seeing no other way, and gestured for Ethan and his mom to stick close as they trailed Derek and the bully through the crowd, the fans parting with a mix of cheers and grumbles. They moved past the main hall, the noise fading into a dull roar as they entered a narrow corridor lined with posters and flickering lights, and Chris kept Ethan in his peripheral, noting the way the kid clung to his shield like a lifeline, his mom's hand steady on his back. Derek led them into a cramped office, desk piled with papers, a radio crackling in the corner, and shut the door, muting the outside world as he said, "Okay, let's hear it, start to finish, no interruptions." The bully went first, his voice louder now, rehearsed, as he said, "I was just joking with the kid, hyping up the con vibe, and this guy comes in hot, acting like I'm some criminal. Next thing I know, he's in my face, threatening me, and the crowd's eating it up." Chris's hands balled into fists, but he waited, letting him finish, and when Derek turned to him, he said, "That's half the story." He was towering over Ethan, mocking his costume, kicking his shield while his buddies filmed it. "I told him to stop. Give him a chance to walk away, and when he didn't, I made it clear he'd regret it if he kept going." Ethan's mom jumped in, her voice shaking but resolute as she said, "I wasn't there at first, but I saw the end. That guy was scaring my son." And Chris stopped him. "Ethan didn't do anything to deserve that." Ethan nodded, his small voice cutting through as he added, "He said my costume was junk, kept pushing me. I didn't want to cry, but..." He trailed off, and Chris saw Derek's expression shift, a flicker of doubt creasing his brow as he glanced at the bully, who shrugged and said, "Kids too sensitive can't take a joke." The room tensed, and then Ethan stepped forward, his shield still in hand as he said, "It wasn't a joke. You wanted me to feel bad, and I didn't even know why." The bully flinched, caught off guard by the kid's quiet defiance, and Chris felt a swell of pride, locking eyes with Ethan as he said, "You're right. He didn't have a reason, just an excuse." Derek leaned back, crossing his arms as he said, "All right, I've heard enough. I'm checking the footage, but this stays quiet until I figure out who's full of it." The bully's smirk faded, and Chris caught a glint of something in his eyes, panic, maybe regret, as Derek added, "You all wait here. I'll be back." He stepped out, the door clicking shut, and silence settled, thick and uneasy, until Ethan's mom turned to Chris and said, "You didn't have to do all this. Why are you still here?" Chris met her gaze, unflinching, and said, "Because Ethan's worth it, and I'm not letting anyone turn this around on him." Ethan stared at him, a question forming. But before he could ask, the bully muttered, "You're wasting your time, man," and Chris's reply was instant. "No, you are. Sit down and deal with it." The cramped staff office felt smaller with every passing second, the air thick with tension as Chris leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his eyes flicking between Ethan, still clutching his shield like an anchor, and the bully, who slouched in a chair, tapping his foot with a restless energy that grated on everyone's nerves. Ethan's mom sat beside her son, her fingers drumming softly on the edge of the desk, her face a mix of exhaustion and resolve as she kept glancing at the door, waiting for Derek to return with whatever verdict the footage would bring. The bully broke the silence first, his voice sharp and jittery as he muttered, "This is taking forever. Shouldn't have to sit here like some criminal just 'cause you couldn't mind your own business." Chris's gaze hardened, but he kept his tone even as he replied, "You made it my business when you went after a kid. Don't act like you're the one stuck here unfairly." Ethan's mom shot the bully a look, her voice low but firm as she added, "You scared my son. None of us would be here if you just left him alone." The bully huffed, rolling his eyes, but the defiance was thinner now, fraying under the weight of their stares. Ethan shifted in his seat, his shield resting across his knees, and his small voice piped up, tentative but clear, "Why'd you even do it?" "I wasn't bothering you." The question landed hard, unexpected in its simplicity, and the bully froze, his foot stopping mid-tap as his mouth opened, then closed, no quick retort ready this time. Chris watched the guy's face, saw the flicker of discomfort, maybe even shame, twist his features, and stepped closer, his presence filling the room as he said, "Yeah, why? What was the point?" The bully's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists as he snapped, "I don't owe you an explanation. It was just a dumb thing, all right?" But his voice cracked at the end, and Ethan's mom leaned forward, her tone sharp as she said, "A dumb thing that hurt my kid. You don't get to shrug that off." Ethan nodded, his eyes locked on the bully now, and added, "I worked hard on this. I didn't think anyone would hate it." The admission hung there, raw and unguarded, and Chris felt a pang, seeing the kid bear that piece of himself in a room full of strangers. The bully shifted, his bravado crumbling further, and he muttered, "Didn't hate it, just didn't think it was a big deal." Chris's eyebrows shot up, and he said, "Not a big deal? You kicked his shield, mocked him in front of a crowd. That's not nothing." Before the bully could respond, the door swung open, and Derek strode in, a tablet in hand, his expression unreadable as he said, "Got the footage, 3 different angles, all clear." He set the tablet on the desk, tapping the screen to play a video, and the room fell silent as the scene unfolded, Ethan backing away, the bully looming over him, the shield hitting the ground, and Chris stepping in, his voice cutting through the noise. The bully's face paled as he watched himself, his earlier confidence nowhere to be found, and Derek paused the video, turning to him as he said, "You're not joking around here, you're intimidating a kid, and it's on record now." Ethan's mom exhaled, her hand finding Ethan's as she murmured, "Thank you for getting that." Derek nodded, then looked at Chris and said, "You didn't threaten him, not how he's spinning it, but you did escalate things, got the crowd involved." Chris didn't flinch, meeting Derek's gaze as he replied, "I'd do it again. Ethan didn't deserve that, and someone had to step up." Derek rubbed his temple, clearly torn, and said, "Fair, but this is a mess online already. People are picking sides, and my boss wants it quiet." The bully seized the opening, his voice rising as he said, "See? He's the one making it a circus. I should press charges or something." Ethan's mom bristled, her voice cutting in, "Charges? You harassed my son. Don't you dare turn this around." Derek raised a hand, silencing them as he said, "No one's pressing anything. I'm banning you from the con, effective now, and that's the end of it." The bully's jaw dropped, and he sputtered, "What? You can't do that. I paid for my pass." Derek's stare was cold as he replied, "I can, and I am. Harassment's a violation, and we've got proof. Security's escorting you out." The bully slumped, defeated, and Chris turned to Ethan, crouching again as he said, "You hear that? He's gone for good. You're safe here now." Ethan's eyes lit up, a real smile breaking through as he said, "Really? So I can stay?" Chris nodded, grinning back as he said, "Yeah, bud, you belong here more than he ever did." Ethan's mom smiled too, her relief palpable as she said, "I don't know how to thank you. This could have ruined his whole day." Chris waved it off, standing as he replied, "Seeing him smiles enough, Ethan's the real champ here." Derek cleared his throat, interrupting as he said, "You're all free to go, but Chris, folks outside are losing it, asking for you." Chris glanced at the door, hearing the muffled cheers, and said, "Let em wait a sec. I'm walking out with Ethan and his mom first." Derek shrugged, stepping aside, and the bully muttered something under his breath as a uniformed guard appeared to lead him away, his head low, the fight drained out of him. They stepped into the corridor, the noise swelling as they approached the main hall, and Ethan tugged at Chris's sleeve, his voice soft but eager as he asked, "Can I show you something else I made?" "It's in my bag." Chris's grin widened, and he said, "Absolutely, lead the way." Ethan's mom laughed, a light sound that cut through the tension, and said, "He's got a whole sketchbook, been drawing heroes nonstop." As they emerged into the crowd, fans erupted, cheers, shouts of Chris, and that was epic. But Chris kept pace with Ethan, who pulled a battered notebook from his bag, flipping it open to a pencil sketch of Captain America, rough but detailed. "This is amazing," Chris said, genuine on his voice, and Ethan beamed, saying, "I drew it after the last movie." The crowd pressed in, but Marcus held them back, and a guy nearby called out, "Kid's got talent. Chris, you made his day." Another added, "That jerk got what he deserved." Chris knelt beside Ethan, ignoring the chaos, and said, "Keep drawing, bud, you've got something special." Ethan nodded, his confidence blooming, and his mom squeezed his shoulder, her eyes bright as she said, "He won't forget this. Neither will I." The fans kept talking, their voices weaving a story of the day Chris Evans stood up for a kid and turned the tables. But for Chris, it was simpler. Ethan's quiet strength had shifted something in him, a reminder of why he did what he did, and as they walked on, he knew that moment would stick with them all, long after the con faded away. "Sometimes," he said, half to himself, "the real heroes are the ones who keep going, no matter what."